Okay, perfect. Let's get started. I hope you had a good lunch break, had some sun. We have a very timely topic now, the role of open research data in the development of AI. So we have a super nice panel with 4 wonderful guests that I introduce in a second. But first, I also want to tell you something. So I'm a reader of The Economist. I don't know, who reads The Economist here of you? I wonder sometimes, still a few. So maybe you saw there was an article this week about the definition of data for AI. So the Open Science Foundation gave out a paper and decided on what their definition is, which would include the code, the weights of a network, but also the data you put in. And then, of course, Meta, Facebook, Zuckerberg replied and said, no, this is not a good definition of open data because they don't show the data. So their definition of open, because Llama seems to be the open one, is that you show the weights, but not the training data, and the code, but not the training data. So you see, we're full in the debate. It's in the press, in one of the biggest magazines, the Weekly Economist. And as the world is debating what is the definition of open data for AI, one is a foundation, the other is a company. Maybe we'll talk also about if there is political decisions coming. Europe is definitely advancing. So this is the topic we're going to talk about. And we have about 90 minutes. It's a long panel. So I'll start here with maybe 40, 50, 60 minutes, depending on how it goes. And I'll open for the audience at the end. But again, if you have questions before, don't hesitate to raise your arm. I'll regularly look into the audience. You can also comment and add your note. And with this, I would like to introduce our panelists, which are from the left to right. We have Jérôme Lecoq, that you heard this morning, a keynote. He's a leading neuroscientist at the Allen Institute, and he has over a decade of experience in developing OpenScope that you will tell us again in a nutshell in a moment. It's an innovative platform using open data. Then on the next to him, we have Gilles Dubochet, that you met before in other panels. He's the head of the open science here at EPFL, also co-chair in multiple councils in Switzerland about policy making in the realm of open science, and also an organizer of this conference. Welcome, Gilles, again. We have Carlotta Mans, who is a researcher at UNIL, University of Lausanne, next doors. She's focusing on international law and is doing a thesis, which is wrapping up, I think. You're writing as we finished even, sorry, okay. Finished her thesis, just saw the first page, which highlights mainly the challenges of the genetic data used by private companies. You'll tell us more about that. So she will bring in the legal and ethical perspective on this. And last but not least, we have Martin Jacki, also from Swiss-German side, like me. He's a professor here at EPFL leading the machine learning and optimization laboratory. And he also co-leads the Swiss AI initiative that I hope you will also tell us a bit more about. And also the Meditron project that you might have read on the news, or at least on the EPFL website, a suite of open source large language model tailored for health. So health is a big topic when it comes to OpenAI and openness and data and AI. And so I would like to start right there, talking about health, and maybe give you the word, Jérôme, that you give us again in a nutshell for maybe those who have not been here during the keynote, what OpenScope is, how you use data, what's the role of AI in it, and the openness.
Thank you. So OpenScope, as I mentioned, is a platform for acquiring data. So I view biology as needing multiple site of foundations to make progress in understanding the brain. And so I think we are the foundational platform layer that acquire data set that can be used at scale to, I think, train more complex AI models of the brain. And so I mentioned in the keynote that most of the AI models are not using piece of insight that the brain tells us, like there are 5,000 different cells, there are inhibitory neurons, there are dendrites, and so it's much more complicated than the initial AI that started in the 80s based on our knowledge of the vision. So I view our role as generating data set that can help us learn how the real brain function, and so I can comment on that today.
Thanks a lot. Maybe I'll follow up on what you just said. This morning, we discussed a lot about also, open data, infrastructures and data. And so on convictions and incentives and reasons to do open or not. So in your specific case of OpenScope, what was the reason you wanted to do it open? Was it out of your conviction, or was it for political reasons, or for funding, or what brought you to do this, or research questions that couldn't be solved differently?
I think fundamentally, we are trying to help the community synergize, like really build a community around platform that can scale up. I mean, AI models have like billions of parameters. And so if you want to train models on real neural data, you need such a large amount of data that it's not available with the traditional approach. So the role of OpenScope, I view it, is to show a way where we can have a researcher build a platform that is shared and that can also generate data that is trusted so that the scientists can use it in their own research. That was like the fundamental principle behind OpenScope, but also the broader effort of the Allen Institute that really way beyond what I'm working on.
Thanks, Jérôme. Maybe I'll pass the word to you, Martin, taking it from here. So we actually don't have anybody from the companies, but you're maybe the closest to the field. So you say, because we heard now again, community building is a big factor. We heard the same thing in the morning. Is there other ways? I mean, do the companies that you see from outside, I know you're in academia, but is it also such important for them to do community building when they build up their data sets to train their models?
Yeah, I like the community building aspect. That's also bridging to openness, like you were saying. So I think for me, openness is about trust, right? So if something is not open, I'm talking about anything, software, AI, or anything, then I don't have the trust, right, in that thing that, for example, I'm using over the internet or so on. So if we build it in open, we have more trust. And community building is a great way to do that jointly, right? To have people joining this effort and ideally achieve the openness jointly. So that's a great initiative, especially in the scientific area. And yeah, I think we'll talk more about LLMs later and health, where maybe this can have a good impact as well.
Thank you. So I repeat myself, I'm a bit the critical voice here because I see they're all like convinced again of this open thing. Me too, I said it again, but I want to be a bit more critical. So you say it builds trust, right? But if you look back, for example, I don't know, the aviation company, they never explained us how there was never an openness, right? Of seeing how a machine works, and still we trust them to fly us around. Or maybe it's not a good example, but I mean, in my field, let's say communication sciences, there is the role of openness and trust is always said, but I don't know to what extent it has been lived in the past. So do you see what I mean? So don't you think that you can build trust also differently? Is this really the real reason why the companies want to go open?
No, I love the airplane analogy you do. I think it's a good analogy. So, and maybe when we had the first airplanes or so, maybe they were quite open, right? It was very basic. There was like 3 people showing if like, here, look what I can do. So I built this thing and everyone can look at it and understand it. But then later on, it became much bigger. It became a whole industry. And at the same time, it also became a science domain, right? So I don't know, aeronautics or something. So people started to do science about planes and other people started to do a business about planes, but they are coexisting, right? So it's not, and the scientific part of that is widely open, I would say, and should be open. So.
Thanks. I'll stay with you and then I move to you, Carlotta, that everybody has a starter. Because I mentioned you were also part of the Meditron project. Can you elaborate what this is for people?
Oh yeah, Meditron is a open source. Okay, we have to be careful with the definitions here on
exactly
on a large language model for medicine. Okay, and yes, it's open in the sense that you can download it, you can play with it. It's based on Llama, and yeah, later we will have discussed much more like, okay, it's a long pipeline, right? Meta has done something to train this Llama. We have trained it further on open data to do medical expertise questions and so on. And then we can use it for getting health information or accessing health information and also, I mean, it's very in the early stage, like with the airplane thing, right? I mean, this is not ready to be replacing a doctor, but it's something there that we need to have this artifact so that we can actually study it and then make sure it's safe and analyze it.
Thanks. So it's basically a large language model or an AI model learning from data, from health data, right?
Yes, this was only trained on like public publications, so scientific publications in health, like the PubMed papers, like 50 billion tokens or words of such public scientific articles.
Okay, thank you. So you see, Carlotta, I'm trying to come closer to you. So they use data of health, public, official data, but your thesis is around sensitive data, around the limits of such data. Can you maybe take it from here?
Yes, of course. So maybe just to put the point down before I start, the idea of open data, it doesn't only challenges human rights, it also enhances human rights. Because if you think about access to scientific progress, equality, access to this data from other universities around the world, it actually enhances human rights. Then there are also challenges that comes with it. And this is notably the case when you talk about personal data, when individual can be re-identified, when it's health data, when it's sensitive data. And then now we know that the model of individual privacy sometimes falls short to address this kind of threats.
So can you, now you mentioned all of them, maybe let's go one by one. So what is the main challenge you see now in this kind of project, for example?
So I don't know the project specifically, but I know that sometimes when we have health data and we have a large amount of data, and we now know that data comes from different sources about all of us, sometimes individual can be re-identified if someone wants to, and this poses challenges to data protection and individual privacy. But also if the data is not only about the individual, but about a group, then we can maybe have some information about group of people, and then this also challenges privacy.
Martin, you want to reply on this, the privacy issue inside the group, which is in general in the AI and data sector a big topic, I guess, right?
No, that's absolutely true, and it's just interesting that yeah, when you mention the groups, another thing is if the groups are if they are accurately served. Another thing is if they are also represented in the data, because here it's like both. They can be users of such an AI, but they're also maybe taking part in training such AI or not, right? So have all cultural different backgrounds being reflected in the training data or not, right? Or is the model systematically worse when you ask in French instead of in English? That's the case now, right? Or in even worse, in a low resource context, in a very rarely used language, it will give much less accurate advice, and that's problematic, of course. I mean, this is one part of the problems. You mentioned also other problems, but this is very hard to fix, and it's very difficult also when these models are closed, because the good models now are all English-centric, right? So this is a very difficult situation, because even the whole internet is very English-centric, so it's not easy to fix that or to incentivize improving this. So I'm looking forward to the discussions on this.
Thanks. So maybe back to you, Carlotta, and then I come to you, Gilles. So topic is around, the problem is everybody agrees on the problem, but do you also have ideas of how one could tackle this, right? Is there a way of using consent maybe to only use data that people want to use? Right?
So we actually discussed this before, but the problem now is that there isn't like a real alternative to consent. I mean, there is broad consent, there is other types of consent, which gives the individual less power. But I mean, in my thesis, I concentrate on the use of data by private parties, so for example, private companies. And maybe it's time that we don't put the responsibility on the individual to consent, because we know that it's impossible to consent, but we put the responsibility on those who use the data. But I only concentrate on the private sector, so I wouldn't know about university studies.
But I guess legally speaking, or at least ethically speaking, it's the same principles, no?
Yes.
You would, I ask you, it's a question.
I mean,
why do you say companies are treated differently?
I mean, at the international level, it's a bit different, because I study from a human rights perspective, and human rights treaty only holds states accountable, not private parties. And we see the same challenges with climate change cases or action that now are, for example, the climate senior union in Switzerland. It's very difficult to hold this company accountable at the international level, and the same is for data. But if the problem is international, as it is for data, because it's not national, it's international, then the problem comes that we can hold these private parties accountable.
Thank you. Gilles, how do you react to all this? I mean, I know I've heard you before in the morning. For those who were here, of course, you're also the head of Open Science, so you're all for it, as open as possible. And we heard the decade ago, right? Data is the new oil. Now data generates new knowledge. We're all for it, but there are these limitations, right? So how do you see this?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, talking about artificial intelligence and ORD, the natural way for me to think about that is in terms of the opportunities that it creates. But I think you're right, and thank you for asking me this question as the first question. I suppose within this framework that we use of as open as possible, as closed as necessary, the emergence, or rather I would say the realization of the potential value that exists within data that comes from what can be achieved through the learning of these large generative AI models is pushing this aspect of the as close as necessary very much into the forefront. We thought we knew what the problems around as close as necessary were. Basically, there are like 3 families of issues we are trying to manage. One is the sensitive private data, what Carlota is an expert of, obviously. The other is dual use knowledge that might have an impact on military or security affairs. And the third one is linked to our innovation mission in academia, commercially sensitive information. So we kind of had an idea that was pretty clear, but of course, with the fact that the data we are producing in science now suddenly has this enormous value in terms of training AI models, which on one hand is what we want. I mean, if there is any purpose in doing research, it is to create a material that allows society to move forward in terms of knowledge creation. So certainly, my view is that when data is open, we should essentially accept and embrace the consequence that suddenly open data has potentially a hugely increased societal value because it allows training these interesting models. But at the same time, and I think the question that is the topic of our debate, really, we can understand it in 2 directions. One is how open research data serves as the Martin Fetterli likes to talk about the data as the new oil of the knowledge economy that now feeds even more the AIs. And I think that is one way we can think of ORD as essentially academia producing this valuable asset that we very much need together. But the other is that open research data is also a model that needs to be applied to the AI models that we develop in academia, that I think, and I very much agree with what you were saying about the notion of trust in connection to that, because we want to be sure that as academics, as the research sector, we have access to AI models, that we have enough trust in them, whether because we build them ourselves for our own purpose or because we have a good understanding of the pipeline that leads to their creation, and that allows us to be certain that we are having the tools that we need in terms of AI that deliver the type of open common resources that we need. And there, I think the matter of ensuring that these are at the level of quality and trust that we need to have is one of the aspects that I would put very much also around what you were asking in terms of protection, because we need to protect our ability to have these models.
Thanks. And I think the oil is really a good image. I think we should stick on this also. But first, I would like to add an element. The way I understood it, there is another, you made a beautiful list of elements, but I think in our call, Carlota, you also mentioned underrepresentation as another factor, right? Maybe I misunderstood, but if yes, can you elaborate? Or
yes, I mean, I also mentioned it that the way that we now, the idea of open data, as I understand it, is also to kind of like fill a void. So the idea is that the other institution can use it and it can help in this sense that it can help inequality. But then I don't know for other types of data, but when I concentrated on genetic data, there is an issue of representation in genetic database, which is very well known. The genetic database are very concentrated on European ancestry individuals, and we don't have much representation of an individual of other ancestry. And this is, as I understood it, it takes quite a tool when then instruments are developed based on this data using AI, because then it might not work as well, or they might be ineffective, or in the worst possible way, they can be dangerous for other people.
I think we had this already in history, before AI. Now it rings a bell. I mean, the whole development of pharmaceuticals were also at the beginning based on Can you elaborate? You know what I'm heading to, right?
I mean, of course, it's not only in genetic data, it is also on other data, and it's not only on other group other than European ancestry group. It is also, for example, we now know that medical research has been concentrating on male for centuries, and
Exactly.
we kind of see the results now. But it's very interesting because it's also very delicate to fill the void. Fill the void. But the idea is that now there are many projects trying to kind of collect genetic data based in African countries. But then if we look into this project, many of the fundings are based in Europe or in the United States, and they're not very controlled by the institution in African countries, but here. So it's very delicate subject.
Yeah, maybe Jérôme, in your case, can you relate to that? I mean, your specific project, do you see some elements of underrepresentation, sensitive data, dual use in this concrete open scope?
I mean, since we're dealing with mice, we assume we get their consent, but I think there is problem of trust. We have to have proper. So, for instance, scientists sometimes there's difference between male and females into effect that you record in the brain. The female and male brains can be different on certain things. And so, for instance, the mice go through hormonal cycles, and so that can influence the processing of information coming in. And so there are aspects of this we need to have enough data so that it can represent the variability that exists in biology. And I think that's generally the problem, is that the variability is too high. A lot of neuroscience, I mean, the problem is it's the never-ending job, because the world is too large, and there's in some ways biology tries to allow individuals to survive in as many conditions as possible, but so the variability is built in. Evolution favor a diversity of population so that they can survive many environments. So I expect that there's always going to be variability in the experiments that we run.
Nice evolutionary take. We have a first question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Yuri Marikovsky from Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences. So actually one of the researchers that produces the data, and the question or the point that I want to raise, and I would love to hear your input on, is apart from when we talk about as close as necessary, apart from sensitive data and commercial interest and dual use data, I think there is one important question that is overlooked here, which is who benefits from ultimate result of AI models. Because as we see, the training of those models is so expensive, and it kind of relates to the topic we had in the discussion before about infrastructure. Like the investments on that infrastructure becomes so expensive that when before the open data was a level playing field, we all have access to it and we all benefit from it. It becomes that only the companies that can train those AI models can benefit from it. When they trained on the data that is open, that is free for everyone to use, but in the end, they're the one benefit. So how do we tether, how do we connect, and how do we make researchers who created the data a part of this process and a part so that they benefit too?
Who's the question for? So it links a bit. Thank you for breaking the ice. And anytime, welcome more questions. Gilles, yes, I see you.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question, because I think you are raising a really essential question here, which is what level of ownership do we as researchers want to keep of the data we produce in terms of where it goes? Now, one part of the answer here is that I think we should be clear about the fact that for our data in general to be used by industry, including in for-profit activities, is a goal that we have. That's one of the reasons taxpayer pays us money. The taxpayers pay us money. But on the other hand, and I think that's what I was referring to in my introduction, there are good reasons why we as a research enterprise want to say that, well, there are certain models that we need in order to play our role of public researchers, of creating knowledge that is neutral, that is open in a sense for the benefit of the community. And we need to be sure that the model that we see as essential for research, that are foundational in a sense of serve as a foundation for our ability to do science, are not essentially privatized, not because privatization is itself a problem, but privatized in a way that means we lose control of, for example, whether matters like our ability to have to take our responsibility about protection of personal data, or our ability to ensure that the research is fair in the sense of, for example, having a balanced representation of genders and ethnic backgrounds in terms of medical research. We need to be quite explicit about what are our needs in that sense. And this makes me think about the very, very old debate in the open source software movement around, I don't know if, I'll just make a short parenthesis here. There are basically fundamentally two types of licenses for software, for open source software. The so-called viral licenses, for example, the GPL license, which basically is an open license that says you can do whatever you want with this piece of software, but there is one condition, well, usually two. One, you have to cite it, but the other is you need to use the same license for what you are doing than what I've been doing. So the idea is that basically any person who uses software that is based on GPL will essentially have to commit to GPL too. So it's viral in the sense that it spreads around you. And then there is the more common form of open source software licenses, Apache, MIT, I mean, most software licenses are in this family, which basically say you can use it as long as you cite it, you do whatever you want, including build commercial software on top of my open source software. And I mean, in our phones or whatever, in our computers, a significant part of the lines of code are open source software when we pay money to Apple or Microsoft or whatever. And that's how the industry works. But for the time being around open research data, the assumption is that the only model we have is essentially the model we give it to you and then you can essentially do whatever you want with it. And to me, this is like a debate I would like to see happen in certain areas of research. I don't know, for example, foundational research in biology or areas like that, to say that, well, we actually are very happy for the industry to like contribute to these models, but we need to be sure that we create a level playing field where research can take place. And applying this type of licenses to data wasn't really, I think, a question before the arrival of AI, but I think I'm putting an idea out here. I'm not sure it's something that that is very mature now, but these are the kind of discussions that I think need to take place because a lot of people are asking the same question that you are asking.
But that's a great, because I had this thought while preparing for this panel of a concrete example. I was thinking of actually of AlphaFold, right? So DeepMind trained how to fold proteins, it's a biological example. And I found some articles, quite relevant ones, which say a lot of this data is actually coming from the protein data bank, which reminds a bit of the SIB we had this morning, right? So it's one of those concrete cases. So you have data that is around, that is very well structured, that then is used by a company to create enormous value. So maybe Jérôme, can you, because it's life science, maybe to close, or Martin, what kind of, Gilles mentioned this, what kind of labeling does this data have? You know, is it just like in iPhones inside for free, but they capitalize on it? Or is it actually true? Do you know more about this?
Yeah, maybe I could just try to expand a bit on the different kinds of data. I mean, I think we mentioned a lot this very expensive data from research, where maybe even from animal experiments or so, where it's like really a lot of work to produce that data. And even then we have many applications, as you mentioned. I just want to mention, on the other hand, there's also much bigger amounts of data which are less sensitive. And I'm thinking about the internet, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, also there are also rules there, and also has to be careful. And what's also lacking there is a bit a consent mechanism for web pages to say, okay, this is my blog, right? Do I want to be part of AI training or not? So it would be such a simple question, just yes, no, right? But currently there's no clear mechanism to do that, right? There is only a robots.txt file which allows you that I do not want to be in any search engine at all, or not in the in that engine and so on. There's nothing for AI training because this is 20 years old and we only have ChatGPT since 2 years. So I just wanted to mention that there is like, yeah, huge amounts of data, not so sensitive, and there is maybe small amounts of data, which is very valuable, and also then more sensitive, which is like what AlphaFold is trained on. And I wonder if the same principle can apply in both scenarios, right? And in both scenarios, there is commercial entities which generate enormous value. And it's kind of funny, right? Even the internet is mostly public, so it's a bit less of a concern. But even there, the resulting models and the companies are very secretive. They even stop publishing, right? I don't know if you see this in life science as well. I mean, there people are at least mostly still publishing, even the companies, right? So there is a need to make sure there's also enough open science in both these extremes of data, from sensitive to not sensitive, from small to large, and interesting topic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jérôme, you want to add something?
Well, it's funny because I never thought about it this way. At the Allen Institute, we used to have a commercial. So like for all code we release, if you were to do a commercial application of a code, you have to reach out to us. We will give everything for free. But the data, the Allen always had this policy that you didn't need to give your identification to download the data, so that you can do whatever you want. We did not even require anyone to sort of cite us formally when they were using our data. So it's really open. But I guess I never thought about we should also put a license in the data that sort of force sort of this spirit to continue, but in some ways. So I don't know, are there initiative that we should follow on that? I'm curious.
Good. That's why we're here for.
I mean,
Initiatives.
Should we put a license on our data? I'm curious.
Anybody knows something, panelists? Yeah.
No, I think that is really a debate that is taking place now. I mean, for a long time, there's been the debate around the licensing of data has been around essentially whether the licensing should ask for citation or not. So, I mean, in technical terms, it's whether it should be a CC0 license or a CC BY license that is applied to data. And overall, data experts preferred the CC0 license, so there was no condition whatsoever to the use of data, what you've been doing apparently, while most researchers preferred the CC BY license. But I think what is new now is this reality that from this data emerges this new object that is the AI model, that in itself, the question of how much of these models will be open and how many of those will be closed is, I mean, we don't have the answer yet. We genuinely don't know. And I think there isn't yet any concrete and specific proposition because everything is going so quickly that it hasn't had time to mature. I mean, if you were a little bit less efficient at developing or less good at developing AI, it would be a lot easier to work through
You're too quick.
The model, the background of how we want socially to handle that, or as a scientific community, but we can't. I mean, the reality is that it's moving quickly.
No, but jokes apart, you're absolutely right. I mean, the speed, how this is developing and how political frameworks work is opening more and more. But I see I want to stay with this example just because for my head it's easier to think. So we have an open data bank of protein structures. Now we developed a new model, all right, AlphaFold. So there are at least two things which are tricky. One are the finances. We look at it maybe later. But the other is also what you mentioned, Carlotta, the underrepresentation. Are we not again in the same thing? So these are not just proteins. These are proteins by a given part of the world, by a given population, and the result, new pharmacological, interventions of these enzymes that maybe help to cure certain diseases will again be skewed. Is this possible, Carlotta?
I mean, I'm not really sure to understand, like in detail how this works. But the idea is that if it's open and if there is a representation and there are different, and it's not only centered in the Western world who are doing this, then it would. Then the idea is that even if the data is open and people can access it, can they use it? Can have other institutions have the same finance to then analyze this data and process it? As I understand, this is also quite expensive, and not every other institution has the means to then use the data, even if they have access to it. but I'm not sure, maybe you're...
Yeah, but it's also, I think also what is recurring now yesterday and today, I think, is this idea of, on one hand, openness. On the other hand, this openness can lead to be used for either in the access journals or in the platforms this morning, now in here. So as Gilles said, it creates a value, genetic data, but this value is queued value, right? We look at the value in a moment, even financial value, but it's the classic. So in that sense, what Gilles said is, looking it through your eyes, it's nothing new, right? It's this field is developing quickly, but if you test something on males or females, if you develop for white or for African populations, or now protein or genetic, it's always the same thing again. Why did not, right? On the longer scale, you could see this coming, legally speaking.
Yes, and maybe just to add something, Gilles said before, AI develops quickly, but then us, how we are as a scientific community, we move a little bit slower. But then also the legislation is then even slower. So there is a next, you said the political framework, even like it takes more time even, and law is always playing catch up when you talk about technological development. So maybe what could be a solution is not to always reinvent new legislation, but to reinterpret the one who are existing, because the idea is that the law is there, but the law can be reinterpreted to address these issues. And we have general principles, for example, in human rights law that cover this, like rights to scientific progress, access to health, all these kind of rights can be used in this kind of sense. But I mean, there must be also the will to do that. Yeah.
Exactly, thank you. And the other part I saw is the financial aspect. So I mean, also taking this example again, so you have now new drugs maybe coming in the next years, and they will generate value, right? And so maybe I'm looking at you, Gilles. So we are now here in Switzerland, first time since decades where budget cuts are coming. And so finances are always an issue. We are at the heart of many invention. We had this discussion 10 years ago with Mariana Mazzucato and the entrepreneurial state. That's where we exactly was made very clear that lots of iPhone codes are actually coming from open source university projects. So we're in the same thing again, you know. To what extent should universities or nations or states not just be blind and say it's taxpayers' money, but maybe also expect a return on investment if something is integrated, if labeled first? To me, it's easier. Just ask questions. I don't have to answer.
Yeah, but I mean, if you ask it, I'm going to answer it, and I'm going to answer it with my hat as the head of open science here. I think the reason, in my view, an academic institution licenses intellectual property and sells it to industry is not because we expect to compensate our missing funding needs, or because we want a bigger budget. It's not how it works out. The numbers are not there. That's not how we get funded in a university like EPFL. And overall, this is just not the model of an academic institution, because if we were to transform into an institution which focuses to sell intellectual property, then we no longer can do research in the true sense of the word. And so the cost for an academic institution to focusing on creating financial value out of IP is essentially a loss of ability that is much bigger than whatever we gain from it. On the other hand, of course, selling IP is a good way to do tech transfer if that is the most efficient way of doing it, and that's the legitimate reason for selling things. So I don't think that it is a legitimate position for an academic institution to say that with the newfound value of the data we have, we're certainly going to try to make the most out of it and start funding ourselves by selling it. I also don't think it's going to work out because, frankly, we've seen just how difficult it is to actually create value out of this very distributed availability of data. There may be some special cases, but anyway. What I do think we should be expecting from industry in terms of using the data that we are providing is to engage with the academics and with the researchers in order to maintain, improve, develop our ability to do science and contribute to the common good in terms of advancing knowledge. And for that, if we end up in an environment where the foundational models that are available in terms of AI for whatever the domain is, whether it's large language models or whether it's like models dedicated to some kind of specific, say, for example, in medical research, the models that I use there, if these are basically designed in a very narrow way for the use of commercial enterprises for their own purpose, for example, only for drug discovery without developing them with the intention to provide what's needed for basic research to take place, then we have a real problem. And that we should be quite clear about the fact that we need this to happen and that we can play with the fact that we are providing a lot of research data in order to do that, whether it goes through licenses or whether it goes through a conversation about what's the value of the academic sector with the industry. The software sector has shown that this conversation can take place.
Interesting. Other takes on that? I see your point, and actually I'm aligned personally, but I still think for the debate, different parts of the world, we have different takes on that. And I think 20 years ago, probably, or maybe here not, we were quite leaders at EPFL, but in other places, we would also said, yeah, if startup gets out of this, nice, you do it. Now we have intellectual property all over the place. And, so you could imagine a world in 20 years where data is labeled and is part of intellectual property of a university. So I don't know if I'm for it or against it, but I could be an utopia or dystopia, right? Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, cool. Any comments on this? Because we're discovering here together new fields, so happy to take comments from you as well. Else I move on. Actually, I want to come to you, Martin, again. So because you have this other concrete case that we mentioned at the beginning, Swiss AI initiative, right? Which what is it exactly? And can you tell us more?
Yeah, what is this, and why should we do the same as industry, or should we? Yeah, maybe that a good connection to that is that, yeah, we have these AI models. There's ChatGPT. For me, there's a bit before and after. So it was a huge jump. I mean, it really surprised me what happened this 2 years ago. And so it's a new topic for all of us. So what should we do? And a concern there is that it's very expensive to change these models. It was mentioned in a question from the audience as well. So it's not a traditional thing that every lab in every university can do on their own, right? So there is a need to do this more cost efficiently, to team up, to train models. But first I should maybe say, why do we want to train the models? Isn't the industry doing that already? So I would say yes, but we want to do the same thing again, but in a transparent fashion, because these are important artifacts for many things. Like, so many people are using these models. I don't know, we're getting soon to like 5 or 10% of the people on this planet using these things. I'm not going into the debate if these models are, how good they are, how bad they are. They're surprisingly good, they're surprisingly bad. Yes. But what is really lacking is that we need to also be able to start scientific research on these models. So what are the risks of these models? What are the advantages? Where are the limitations? What can they do? What can they not do? So for that, we need to study these models. And for being able to study them, we need to have them. And now as you say, okay, isn't Meta providing us this model? And the answer is no, it's not. That's not enough. We cannot do scientific research on that, because any model that's currently around, we have no idea what went into the training of these models. There's no idea what was the training data. It's a complete secret, even in the models that you can download, right? Even in those, right?
In the open ones, exactly. So the economist mentioned.
The models we can download is a very small fraction. I mean, there's 100 times more models which are completely closed. So let's talk about the ones we can at least download and use and so on. And then among those, there's a even tinier fraction of, maybe there's like 1 or 2 which are not very good yet, for which we actually know what they were trained on, and we can control that, and we can study questions like you asked, like about representation. What languages can they do? Why do they fail? Why do they make any racist comment? I mean, you need to look at the training data to see why that happened, right? And for that, we need to have it. Do these models memorize things? So, which is a necessary question to answer copyright questions. We don't know, right? How much do they memorize? So for that, we need to know what was in the training data. So it's hugely important to have some models, at least, for which we have full transparency, that we can trust them, right? And to do a lot of research on it and use them for sensitive applications, right? If this is used, if this model is used in the public administration or so on, it needs to be trustworthy. Otherwise, it's not going to be ready deploy it. So for that model, it's maybe nice to know what was in the training data. So very few institutions globally have attempted to make both open, the data and the model. And one of the very notable ones is actually the Allen Institute from AI. They have the best currently open model, but it's still quite behind the commercial models, right? So the Swiss AI initiative is trying to team up all AI researchers who are related to Switzerland and even more broadly, trying to do something like that. And also, I mean, that's only a small part. There's many aspects, right? There's different modalities. There's groups studying security, there's groups studying vision and other modalities, there's verticals, people studying this for health applications, for scientific applications, for education is a very important domain as well, because we see these models, they pass every EPFL exam in all master courses. So there's risks and opportunities in education, which are very important to study. And also for that, it's kind of important to know what went into this model when it was built. And yeah, we're trying to team up. Luckily, 3 years ago, the Swiss administration bought a new machine. So before ChatGPT, if you would buy this machine now, you would pay a much higher amount. So we were very lucky that Switzerland every 3 years buys this new supercomputer, and that we can now attempt to coordinate a bit to make such models so that then everyone here can play with them and do research on them and maybe use them for more sensitive applications, and trying to help a bit closing this gap between the open source community and the black box models behind the closed doors.
So the creation of the models is the first step. Is this already started, if understood? Before you and what is because that just has been announced a few months ago, right? I saw it.
Yes, but the cluster is always a bit delayed and has bugs and goes down again every second day. So this week is the first week the cluster is actually fully available, and the data is ready because it's mostly on the internet. So we will be a bit more careful how to select the training data, right? Because we want to make that transparent, to do some necessary steps to remove some PII data, to respect those people who do not want their website to be part of it, and so on. So the model, yeah, to be a bit more transparent and careful on that, which means the model might be not as good as the best commercial model, but at least it's maybe easier to understand it and to understand where are the differences and where do all these capabilities come from that it has or does not have. That's one of the directions.
Thank you. So you see, Gilles, there is some time actually there.
Thanks to bugs in the cluster.
We can still co-develop policies as well. I'm actually talking about education. I don't know if you saw this case just before the summer break in Zurich, still the biggest canton or the most populated canton in Switzerland. They have this national high school score over the whole canton, and the best person who had I don't know, 5.999, he went to the press the day after his high school exam, 20-year-old, and he said, I didn't read one single book of the exam. I to check them all with ChatGPT. Was a massive blow to all the teachers in the canton. So it's already happening, right? The use is more than 5%, probably. Acceptance rates are way above. Okay, when maybe zoom out a bit from the Swiss context and look also about the European, which European AI Act. Maybe Carlotta, I guess you are a bit more aware of these things. So talking about speed, looking from the outside, it seems to me that the European Union is advancing a bit quicker than us in that level. Is that true? How do you see it? What are they regulating?
So I'm not an expert on the AI Act, but yes, and I just maybe before that, I just want to quickly touch on that. So as you said before, it's so interesting that you say, oh, everything is closed. A lot is closed when you talk about Meta, and this is the point I wanted to before, and I think it's something that we all know. It's not a surprise for everybody, but when we talk about regulation of data protection, we cannot do that without taking into account how important these actors are and how much they influence when the regulations are adopted and how much lobbying there is when the regulation is adopted. And this goes back also to the European level when the GDPR was adopted. I've read a very interesting book that now I cannot remember the author of, but she did a whole chapter about the lobbying in Brussels that happened during the GDPR adoption and how much these actors were there and they were kind of trying to influence that. So I think the starting point when we talk about that from a legal point of view that we cannot forget is that there is an imbalance of power between the individual because we cannot give informed consent now. In most situations, it's very difficult, but there is also an imbalance of power between the countries and this kind of private actor that are in some cases more powerful than the country, which makes it very difficult to regulate them. And to go back to the EU, yes, there is a lot going on in there, and there is much regulation adopted. I see some kind of like I'm not an expert on the EU regulation, but I've analyzed a little bit when it comes to the GDPR, and it's also like it comes with some solution, but it falls short also to address the general problem. But I think just because we don't know, there is anybody, as we said before, there isn't anybody who really knows like a solution to this. Mm-hmm. But the AI like goes into this direction and kind of tries to address it.
Yeah, and as far as I understood, and I know even less than you, it's also about applying, as you said, the basic human principles also in AI, right? Adapting, so human protection, human rights, safety. So basically applying these in a new field as well, right? I think that's the first level that is happening.
Yes.
You can't use, yeah.
Yes, and I think it's a great idea because when we try to regulate in the specific, it goes very fast. It kind of like it gets outdated also very fast. But if we take some kind of overarching principle and we try to adaptate it to this kind of like thing that evolves very quickly, then the case law can evolve with it. And when we talk about the European Union content, then there is the court, and we kind of have all these instruments that makes it a little bit easier to adapt to this new situation.
Thank you. I still can get my head around it each time you are here open. I mean, it's not only lobbying and legal, it's also communication, right? I mean, that open AI is called like this. It's still crazy, It's probably the best act of communication since 10 years. So because I'm happy that you, Martin, you said, no model is really open, right? You said very clearly, not even the llama, as we said in the beginning, the economist, that shows a bit of weights maybe, but there is no such thing as openness, but the brand is called open AI.
Yeah, you're completely right there. And this is the one on the most extreme of closeness, right? And then on the middle one, there's good models like the llama one is still valuable because Meta has really done a good job, at least that we can at least have this model play with it, even if we don't understand it fully because we don't know what it's trained on, but at least it's better than not having it. And they spent a lot of money to train it and then release it. So that's nice, but I'm just saying it's not a model that we know what it's trained on, which there is one from LNAI, which has this thing, it's called Dolma. There is another smaller one from a Hugging Face there's a university initiative, which has some kind of first baseline models. It's funny that this took so long, right? That it took like more than 2 years after ChatGPT until we also really attempt to several universities team up, globally, not only in Switzerland, to also have fully reproducible pipelines to have these models and study them. And there's a long way to go, right? Because there's still a big accuracy gap. Yeah.
In the Economist article, they even talk about open AI washing or something. There's a new term like greenwashing coming that is used in terms of, trying to somehow say it's open, it's not really, and I can do my business. Okay, yes, perfect. I was just about to say questions in the audience.